While the world is obsessing over diplomatic handshakes, high-level summits, and bizarre Bollywood propaganda clips of Vladimir Putin riding motorcycles, the real assessment of the war in Ukraine is not coming from the halls of Congress or the meeting rooms of Brussels. It is coming from the ground. Major Jānis Slaidiņš, a NATO staff officer and Zemesardze major, has just dropped a reality check that cuts through the noise of the 24-hour news cycle. He calls Europe the current weak link. He explains in brutal detail why a peace deal is terrifying the Ukrainian general staff. And he breaks down exactly why European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen wants to turn Ukraine into a porcupine. Let's break down this briefing, because it exposes what is really happening behind the closed doors of this war, far away from the cameras and the smiles of diplomats. To understand the current state of play, we have to look at the atmosphere. It is Friday, but as Major Jānis Slaidiņš notes, there is nothing positive to report. There is a constant, grinding mulling over of peace treaties and political maneuvers, while the reality in the trenches remains a bloodbath. The Western press is currently tearing into Donald Trump's potential strategies, but Slaidiņš did some digging. He looked back at the national security strategy from 2017 during Trump's first term and noted how drastically things have shifted. But while Washington pivots, the front line simply holds. Right now, the cities of Pokrovsk and Mirnorod are holding. Huliaipol is holding. The Russians are attacking relentlessly, wave after wave. But in the last 24 hours, there have been no significant breakthroughs. The fighting is heavy. The casualties on both sides are horrific. But the line is not breaking. The intensity of the clashes has dipped slightly, but that is not a sign of peace. It is a sign of exhaustion. And this brings us to the elephant in the room, the peace deal. Everyone in Europe is panicking about what a new administration in the White House means. But Major Jānis Slaidiņš points out a critical, fatal flaw in all this talk of negotiations. He says that any peace treaty signed right now risks becoming nothing more than a pause before a new Russian invasion. Why is a man in uniform so cynical about a ceasefire? Because despite all the talks in DC, all the summits in Europe, and all the promises of ironclad support, absolutely no one has defined what security guarantees actually look like. This is the thing that terrifies Kyiv. If Ukraine signs a deal and stops fighting, who guarantees that Russia will not attack again in 2 years? Is it a piece of paper? Are American troops going to be stationed in Kyiv? Unlikely. Is NATO going to shoot down Russian jets over Kharkiv? Probably not. Slaidiņš is blunt about this. He effectively calls these undefined guarantees rubbish. If Russia decides to attack again, a piece of paper means nothing. We have seen this before. The fear in Ukraine is palpable that the incoming US administration might try to force a deal just to wash their hands of the conflict, blaming the previous administration for the mess, leaving Ukraine exposed at its most critical moment. So if a piece of paper is not a guarantee, what is it? Slaidiņš points to a concept recently mentioned by Ursula von der Leyen. Ukraine must become a porcupine. The logic here is cold, hard, and military. You do not need a treaty signed in a hotel in Istanbul or a handshake in Switzerland. You need an army so terrifyingly bristled with weaponry, aviation, domestic military production, and air defense that Russia is physically afraid to step 1 inch across the border. As Slaidiņš puts it, the most reliable path to long-term peace is not diplomacy. It is a strong, lethal Ukrainian army. Any restriction on the size or capability of that army as part of a peace deal is not a compromise. It is a death sentence. But while the West debates these theoretical guarantees, Vladimir Putin is on a victory lap. He is currently in India, and the spectacle is something to behold. While he is there to secure economic lifelines, the propaganda machine has gone into overdrive. Indian television is broadcasting animated clips resembling a fever dream from Bollywood, showing Putin and Prime Minister Modi riding motorcycles together, buying Russian oil, and Putin literally rips a Make America Great Again hat off Donald Trump's head. It seems absurd to us, but it signals something dangerous: Putin's euphoria. Major Slaidiņš notes that Putin is currently in a state of confidence similar to where he was in early 2022. He believes he has weathered the storm. He believes the West is crumbling. In interviews with Indian media, Putin reiterated his stance. He will achieve all his goals from 2022. He is not looking for a compromise. He is looking for capitulation. He even brought up the failed Istanbul negotiations from the start of the war, claiming that Russia's withdrawal from the Kyiv region was a goodwill gesture to facilitate peace. This is where Major Slaidiņš stops being an analyst and starts speaking like a soldier. He reminds us of the reality of that goodwill gesture. The Russians did not leave Kyiv because they were kind. They left because the Ukrainian army smashed them. As the Major colorfully put it, the Ukrainians laid a couple of thousand Ivans in the dirt, destroyed their logistics, and forced them to run. That was not diplomacy. That was defeat. But Putin's confidence relies on a very specific narrative, that Russia is winning inevitably. But let us look at the math. Major Slaidiņš highlights a brutal statistic that shatters the myth of Russian invincibility. After nearly 4 years of total war, after transforming their entire economy into a war machine, after suffering hundreds of thousands of casualties and becoming a pariah state to the West, Russia has managed to occupy roughly 19.5% of Ukraine. Think about that. The self-proclaimed second army in the world, the largest country on the map, has destroyed its own future to gain less than 1/5 of its neighbor's territory. That is not a masterstroke of strategy. It is a meat grinder. It is a failure of objectives on a massive scale. So if Russia isn't as strong as it looks, why is the West so afraid? Here's the controversial take from the briefing. We usually hear that the United States holds the keys to the conflict, but Jānis Slaidiņš identifies the current weak link as Europe. While the United States is volatile, Europe has been inconsistent since day one. Jānis Slaidiņš notes that there are a lot of words, European leaders saying, "We will support you to the end." But where is the path? Where is the strategy? He points to German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who recently rejected the idea of transferring frozen Russian assets to the United States to fund Ukraine. It is a bureaucratic hesitation that costs lives. The Europeans are desperately trying to figure out how to influence Trump, but they have not even figured out how to use their own economic power effectively. Major Jānis Slaidiņš argues that the Kremlin's goal right now is simply to buy time. They want to stall until February. They want to block any new sanctions from the United States, prevent the transfer of those frozen assets, and watch the European aid programs collapse under the weight of their own bureaucracy. Putin is betting that Western unity is a facade that will crack before his economy does. This leads to Major Slaidiņš delivering his most biting critique of the entire war's justification. Putin claims over and over that this invasion is necessary to protect ethnic Russians and the Russian language in Ukraine. He frames it as a humanitarian mission. Slaidiņš fires back with a point that exposes the dark irony of the Russian world. He says that the best place to save Russians is in Russia. He notes that in vast swathes of Russia, people live in barracks. Half of Russia's villages do not even have gas connections or paved roads. Their hospitals are crumbling. If the Kremlin actually cared about the well-being of Russians, they would spend those billions of dollars building roads in Siberia, not destroying villages in the Donbas. They are burning down Ukrainian cities to save people who never asked to be saved, while their own citizens live in poverty. It is a hypocrisy that is difficult to ignore. The takeaway from this briefing is stark. The diplomatic euphoria Putin is feeling right now is a bluff, but it is a dangerous one. He wants to freeze the conflict because he knows, deep down, that he cannot win a war of attrition against a fully unified and rearmed West. He knows that 19.5% is not a victory. It is a quagmire, but that Western unity is the giant question mark. As Slaidiņš concludes, the only thing that matters is not a signature on a treaty or a handshake in a palace. It is weapons, it is funding, and it is the stability of the Ukrainian rear. If the West forces a bad peace deal now, without that Porcupine defense, we are not ending the war. We are just giving Russia a few years to reload, rearm, and finish what they started. The question remains, Does Europe have the political will to become the strong link? Or will they let the peace trap snap shut on Ukraine? The soldiers in the trenches of Pokrovsk do not have the luxury of debating it. They are holding the line, waiting for the world to decide if they want a ceasefire or if they want a victory.